We're ready for another edition of Just Say No.
Can't you see that there's another way to love?
We're ready for another edition of Just Say No.
Can't you see that there's another way to love? Soldier blue, soldier blue. Can't you see that there's another way to love?
Yes, back again here. Just Say No news update. We have another news update. Israel is again skirmishing on the borders. They're bombing Lebanon, and they are planning an assault.
But I know colleagues, I know nursing colleagues who are coming to our vigils who were abused in the corridor in their own hospital, labeled a terrorist, shouted at, spat at. I know of at least 2 doctors, one who was put on suspension from the GMC for a period of time whilst they were investigating. A dear friend of mine, also but in Canada, was put on forced administrative leave for 3 months from her job for doing media work. For literally just talking about her experience speaking to people of Gaza through Gaza Medic Voices and some of these platforms. So yeah, there's been numerous cases where we've seen people being reprimanded for speaking the truth or for speaking up for Palestine.
For the past 6 months, we have seen a lot of images and footage coming out from the hospitals, from the streets, of different kind of injuries, horrific scenes. Like, for example, one of the pictures I keep sharing on my Twitter is that an old man who was 62 years old and he was run over by a tank. So we also see burns. One of my nieces who first survived the war, she got more than 50% burnt in her body, and then she succumbed to her wound and she died. So we are seeing a lot of different kind of injuries, horrific scenes of injuries. How does that make you feel, seeing all of these injuries, all of these types of wounds, of children, of old men, of old women, of young men, young women? Do you think that Israel, in your view, do you think that Israel is trying to cause as much as death and destruction on the Palestinian people?
Absolutely. I think the end goal is, we saw it today, the finance minister in the government came out and said we will destroy Gaza completely. Again, they've said this very clearly from day one. They said these are subhuman animals. We will attack them. We will take our revenge. We will make Gaza uninhabitable. Everything they have said, they have done. So absolutely, these injuries, when I see the children that are amputated, the children with the burns, a very clear example that haunts me till now is Lu'ay Sarhan. Lu'ay Sarhan was 3 years old. He was the first child that I presented to our hospital to try and bring him to the UK. He was found under the rubble when the paramedics came and found him, and he was obviously, the house underwent shelling. His mum was in intensive care. The rest of the family were killed apart from his maternal aunt. They lifted his legs and the skin literally just came away down to the bone. And this was retrospectively white phosphorus that was used to do that. The kind of injuries that we're seeing, this is not a normal burn for the skin to go down to the bone to come away like this. So this child, ended up treated in Gaza. The Al Shifa hospital surgeons did an amazing job, as much as they could with limited resources, to try and salvage him. He was flown out to Egypt, eventually ended up in Qatar, and he passed away. He died. Allah yarhamhu, may he rest in peace. And that was in December. And when I still remember the image, I have that picture of his injuries. And I showed this to the chief executive of our hospital, and I said, just have a look at this. And he was gobsmacked. He sat, from standing up, he just fell to his chair. And this is an orthopedic surgeon who's seen trauma. He said, I've never seen these kind of injuries in children. These happen in Iraq and IED bombs, or these happen in conflict zones to combatants or young men. These shouldn't be happening in children. At the same time, I speak to my colleagues who have just come out from Gaza, Dr. Junaid Sultan and Dr. Khalid Saleh from Fajr, a large NGO that's just been in. and they describe they're seeing gunshot wounds to children as young as 3 and 4 to the head. Why would there be a gun pointed at a child's head of that age, unless you are firing to maim or kill? The injuries that that are being described are unprecedented, and I think not only are they trying to completely destroy and kill as many people as possible, but it's actually creating a population of people with disability. I think they are genuinely
Yes.
trying to disable. Why else would there be so many amputations? These children who have had multiple amputations, they will be a burden on society for decades, and we're talking about thousands of them. We're not talking
Thousands, yeah.
about thousands, tens of thousands, if not. We saw this in the Great March of Great Return, where they were shooting at the kneecaps. This is, again, like I say, none of this is new. This was all happening before. It's just now it's accelerated, and it's on like a scale that we've just
And I think
never
also
experienced.
the danger of that goes beyond the physical injuries, because I'm going to give you an example. Today, my wife showed me a video of a young kid. She was maybe 6 or 7 years old, and she was telling her story. And she said, "They killed my father, and then I saw my little brother, and he had his head cut off." And a little kid, little child, had to witness this happen to her brother, younger brother, and her father. And she saw that, and she's talking about it. How do you think that would affect her mentality for the rest of her life?
This is the tip of the iceberg, and this is I call it the coming mental health epidemic that will result from this, because the trauma that these children are undergoing, and you see they almost age quicker than
They do.
they do. You see children who I'm surprised at how young they are. You see the blonde child, I forget his name, who was, I think he was 3.5 or 4.
Yeah.
And he's describing in detail his parents being butchered in front of him. And he talks about, what he saw, and he's very articulate about what he's seeing. And they've had to age quickly because they are subjected to horrors beyond horrors. In terms of the long-term effects, we know this. We know these children will undergo, there'll be post-traumatic stress disorder, there'll be long-term effects, and this will affect their likelihood of getting an education, their likelihood of doing well at school,
Of having a normal life.
of having a normal life, of not suffering from depression, anxiety, whatever it is that comes down the line. And I think there's a real risk there that if that is not, I guess these children, there is very little we can do for the ones that have been affected right now. I mean, there will be rehabilitation. There's ways that we can intervene. But the message from day one has been, this needs to end. How many more thousands of these children need to witness these horrors or to undergo these horrors?
Can we describe this war as a war on children?
I have a real aversion to using the word war, because this is not two-sided. I think this is a genocide, this is butchering, this is murder. Yes, children have been disproportionately affected, but I think you can say it's a war on medics, you can say it's a war on journalists, it's a war on, every one of these sectors of society that should be protected, on aid workers. How many aid workers have been killed? So every one of these sectors of society that should have some sort of privilege in terms of being protected is being targeted more so than the rest of the population. So I think it's a butchering of children, butchering of medics, butchering of journalists.
And yet, we see all that, and we still find a lot of censorship, as you have mentioned, on those who want to speak up, who want to advocate for the Palestinians' human rights, for human rights in general. We see all of this silencing, and at the same time, people like you don't get to the mainstream media. We don't hear stories like that in the mainstream media. Why do you think the mainstream media ignores the Palestinian voices? The doctors in the UK who have views like yours, especially that there are many Jewish doctors who are speaking up, but we don't see them in the media. We don't hear their voices. Why do you think there is silencing on you and on other health workers in the UK?
I think if you allow voices like ours to speak the truth to power and to expose what is happening, it will start potentially turning those fence sitters, that silent majority, to start themselves questioning what is happening. And I think that clearly is going to affect the power structure. You know, I think the way that the UK and the US especially is, it's almost like, Israel is the Israeli state is sacred to them. They see it as they can do no wrong. So if you start to question that and you start to push back against that, then you're then questioning that special relationship. You're saying, well, why should we be undergoing arms trades deals with Israel? Why should we be exporting arms and importing arms? Why should we be, sanctioning a government that is genocidal? So again, it's the same thing that is happening. It's the targeting of health workers in Gaza directly in that way of killing people who are truth speakers or truth givers, in a similar way that is being done here on a much more nuanced level, which is the silencing, it's the shutting down, it's the censorship, holding an event, and being told you're not presenting both sides, threatening people to lose their jobs, medics, etc. So it's a microcosm of what is actually happening in Gaza, but on obviously a much different level, because you can't start shooting medics here, but you can silence them, you can shut them down. Having said that, I mean, I had a lot of airtime on mainstream media initially. What's interesting is I initially was very measured maybe in what I was saying. I would always present sort of facts. I would give these personal stories. As soon as I started veering into, using words like genocide or apartheid or occupation, at that point, I could clearly suddenly see it just dried up in terms of any media interest. And even I remember there was an interview where it was BBC, and I got riled up because they kept referring to the Hamas-led Ministry of Health. And I just said, I started to respond to them, and I said, can you just explain to me, why do you need to keep referring to it as the Hamas-led Ministry of Health? Do you refer to the NHS as the Tory government-led NHS? What? And as soon as I said that, the presenter cut me off. And you can see the clip where I'm still trying to talk, and he's just cut me off and then ended the interview there, because I'm challenging that narrative. Because, clearly by saying that, there's a motivation, and the motivation is you're trying to say any figures from the Ministry of Health in Gaza are technically might be inaccurate because they're coming from Hamas. And again, because they've turned the word Hamas into a dirty word. It's, labeled as a terrorist organization, despite it having previously been, still the government that is ruling people of Gaza. So yeah, I think that's essentially what we're seeing. And it's as soon as you start making enough noise, the powers that be start to get worried, and when they get worried, they will censor you, they will shut you down. And we're seeing that now in the US. We were talking about the protests on the student campuses. In 2007, 2008, when I was a medical student, we occupied the Radcam in Oxford University within 1 week of Operation Cast Lead. We occupied that building and stayed there overnight and made the same demands that we're now seeing: divestment, sanctions, and yet now it's taken 6 months for an eruption in the US across student campuses. And I was thinking the other day, why is it taking this long? And I think it's because since 2007 up until now, that system of colonization has just become so entrenched that it's so difficult to break apart. And that threat of anti-Semitism, that threat of being labeled, a terrorist or an anti-Semite or Hamas supporter, has become so glaring that it freaks people out.
But do you see any changes right now? And people are speaking up now, unlike before. I see there's a change coming. It's not enough yet, but a change is coming.
I think change is coming. I think what is happening in the US on those student campuses is so important. And I think the reason why they are now clamping down and attacking them with riot police and threatening to send the National Guard in is because they are scared, because they know these are the seats of power. Columbia University, Yale, Harvard, this is where the future leaders of the US are trained. So if you start to sort of see that dismantling of the status quo, then they are, they're worried about what does their political future look like. Within my profession, within health workers, I said at the start, doctors and medics tend to be quite cautious. We don't speak up that often. We're not politically super active. But that movement of health workers that has come about because of this, I think, is a reflection of many people who have broken through that fear barrier. And that fear barrier those walls need to continue crumbling. And I think the only way to do that is to demonstrate that we are safe in our numbers, and that the more of us are speaking up, the more of us are together in these protests, the more of us are holding the vigils, the more of us that are approaching our royal colleges, institutions, and making specific demands, the less likely they can come after every single one of us.
A few days ago, I saw an image of a building of Al-Widad Society for Community Rehabilitation. It's an organization, one of the leading organizations in the Gaza Strip, that provides community rehabilitation services. And I used to work there for a year or so. And that building was destroyed in this war. The moment I saw this building destroyed, I was devastated. It was very painful to watch a building in which you worked for a year or so, where you held activities, where you visited your friends and all of that. And then I realized that all the buildings, the places that I worked at in Gaza, they were all destroyed. My home was destroyed. And it's very painful to watch that. I would like to ask you, when you saw these images and the footage from Al-Shifa Hospital and the Nasser Hospital and the medical faculties in which you trained your students, how did you feel?
Devastated, but also thinking this is extremely painful to watch. For myself, who's only visited those places maybe once a year, spent 2 to 3 weeks there at a time. What of the Palestinians, what of the people of Gaza, who this is their actual home, their actual hospital where they're going in or they're working in on a daily basis. So and forget even the hospitals. I was just looking again very early on. I remember seeing pictures of Al-Amari Mosque, a beautiful mosque that was next to the hotel we used to stay in. And we'd go there and pray Maghrib and pray Isha and come back. And I saw that destroyed. And it was very triggering because I still remember the memories of sitting there speaking to the medical students who were with us. The hotel we were at completely destroyed. The hospitals, for sure. I mean, looking at Al-Shifa Hospital, this was an amazing complex. This was, the heartbeat of the Gazan healthcare system. And that's all reduced to rubble. That's all completely gone. But what is even more devastating is the lives, the people who have gone. Because the people made that hospital, and those doctors and those nurses and those healthcare workers made the hospital what it was. So without those people, it's just a shell of a building. So as painful and as sad it is to see buildings destroyed, what hurts even more is just knowing that every one of those attacks involved people that either I know or people that, in my profession who have been killed or exterminated.
But these buildings, when we're talking about hospital, these buildings are very, very important because these buildings have the facilities in which doctors can save lives. So when you destroy that building, you're destroying part of the health system in Gaza. And it's very, very difficult to rebuild these hospitals. It's very difficult to get the equipment. We already suffered from a lack of equipment in Gaza. Now all of it is destroyed. How can we? And people maybe don't understand the value of a Shifa Hospital. Shifa Hospital was the leading hospital, the biggest complex hospital in Palestine. And it's the oldest one maybe. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of Al-Shifa Hospital and why destroying Al-Shifa Hospital was a disaster for medical health and medical care in Palestine and in Gaza specific?
So I think, as you rightly pointed out, Al Shifa, we call it the heartbeat of the Gazan medical system, healthcare system. And I think the other thing to say, again, coming back to the people, the surgeons working at Al Shifa Hospital, hands down, were some of the best surgeons in the world. These were trauma surgeons trained in a way that, nowhere else have surgeons been experiencing that level of trauma over the last 15 to 20 years. Every few years, there'll be an escalation. There'll be tens of thousands of injuries coming in. They need treatment. Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta very clearly talks about this. He's gone and trained surgeons in there, and he said many of these surgeons were top of their field. These were people who, if they were outside Gaza, they would be leading the chief of staff of, MGH or the top universities, the top medical schools in the West. Targeting it, it was almost, I remember a friend of mine saying to me, because this obsession with Shifa began very early on, the threats against Al Shifa continuously, we're going to attack it, there's tunnels underneath, we have to take it out. There was a build-up of this, and it was almost like the Baghdad airport moment of the Iraq war. It was like, once this is broken or this is done, they have reached their objective, and this objective was clearly to just completely destroy that hospital. And we have to remember, it underwent multiple attacks. There were attacks and withdrawals and then further attacks, and what we saw at the end, that picture of the hollow shell, was just a result of months and months of attacks. But I think, having worked and been inside and trained doctors there, as you said, this was the most vibrant, loud, busy, just active hospital in Gaza, and provided so much care to that community. Many of the people who had been affected by previous wars, had had limbs amputated, limbs injured. They were undergoing rehabilitation. They were seeing these specialists. They were continuing to have treatment there. And you're right. Before the 7th of October, the healthcare system in Gaza was already on its knees.
Yeah,
it was in a chronic state of underfunding. It was a chronic state of shortages. Many of the staff were working 6 months at a time without pay.
Yeah,
they would go for 6 months, essentially volunteering, and they never complained. When you talk to them about this, they just said that's a matter. That's a matter of fact. That's just how it is. So it was already an underfunded system on its knees. The patients who needed tertiary referrals to be transferred out of Gaza to Israel, Egypt, or Jordan, the number of referrals was going down. There were people dying at the border waiting to get out for complex treatment. So the last thing they needed was a full-blown conflict on this scale. And had it been any other conflict where it's not a direct targeting, maybe the healthcare system would have survived. But in this situation, every one of those hospitals has been destroyed in some way, shape, or form, whether it's direct attacks, whether it's cutting the supply chain, stopping the aid coming in, stopping basic medications from going in. And now the European hospital is probably the only functioning hospital.
Yeah.
And when you talk about functioning, Nick Maynard and others who have been in say this, there are no functioning hospitals in Gaza. We're talking about a very different level of functioning compared to what we perceive as functioning here. You're talking about doing operations with little to no anesthetic. You're talking about not providing antibiotic cover after you've done complex operations. You're talking about having to reuse single piece equipment, something like the external fixators. And the MAP team were talking about that. They were having to take out the external fixators from the corpses of dead bodies, single use, and put them in a patient that's living, because that's the only solution. Sure, you're probably that patient may well get sepsis or an infection and die, but if you don't put it, then they will die anyway. So there's a balance. And this is medieval style medicine that no society, no people, no one should be having to go through or to live under, essentially.
Let's imagine this war ends tomorrow. How many years will it take Gaza to revive, to rebuild its healthcare system?
The whole of Gaza needs, it's decades worth of work, and that's just touching the surface. We don't even have proper analysis of what's there and what's left behind. I mean, the north and the center of Gaza are very difficult to access. The little that we know is based on NGOs that have gone into the south of the European hospital at Rafah. This is going to take billions of dollars worth of money to reconstruct not only the buildings that have gone, but the whole healthcare system from a primary care level. We have to remember, the Palestine Medical Relief Society, the most prominent organization that has been doing primary health work since the 70s under Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. They have been attacked. These were providing very key services on a public health community level. These have been attacked. Their centers, their staff, since day one, they're decimated. And this is just one NGO of dozens, if not hundreds. So this is going to take a mammoth task of NGOs going in. And the problem is, we see this even now. There is very little to no coordination at times when these NGOs are going in. There is no clear plan. There is no day after plan. We keep talking about the day after, but there really isn't a plan there as such. Even the people making the decisions about what happens the day after are not talking to the Gazans themselves. They're making those decisions on their behalves. They're going to the US and they're sitting in rooms with maybe the Palestinian Authority at best, probably the Egyptians, and maybe some other authorities, and saying this is how we plan to rebuild it. But what about the people of Gaza who have undergone this? What do they want? How do they want to see their whole area restructured and rebuilt?
What is your message to the doctors who are aware of the situation and they are still afraid to speak up?
I would say to them, there are many examples, myself and others, many examples of us who have put our head above the parapet and been able to speak up. And because of the fact that we are on the right side of history, we are speaking truth. We are not saying anything, frankly, controversial. We are safe in our numbers and we need to keep pushing. And I don't expect, when I say people speaking up, I don't expect everyone to go on television and give interviews. I don't expect people to go and give speeches at rallies. Every one of us has a different skill set. Some of us can do work behind the scenes that can help this movement. And this is a growing movement. The Health Workers for Palestine group is now thousands of people across the world, hundreds of whom are in the UK. And it's so crucial to understand that you are not alone. If you speak up, even if you speak up at the workplace and you see something that is just, clear double standards and you speak up against it, you are not alone. You have hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who can provide a support network. And that's where we see ourselves. And I think my message is, don't be afraid. My message is, break through that barrier and it will liberate you. When we talk about freeing Palestine, for me, we're freeing ourselves, actually. We're decolonizing ourselves from that mindset of, whatever the West or whatever the government has told us how we should act or how we should be. This is the most important thing. You're actually, you are freeing yourself from that sort of that dogmatic mindset.
Dr. Omar Abdel Mannan, thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Always. In the blue expanse of the Mediterranean, a ship named Madeleine sails towards Gaza. It carries no weapons, only food, medicine, and defiance. Launched by the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, Madeleine is headed for a land under siege as Israel continues to enforce a near-total blockade on aid to Gaza. The result? Children dying of hunger and more than 90% of the population facing catastrophic food shortages. The ship is named after Gaza's most recognized fisherwoman, a symbol of survival, a tribute to resistance. Madeleine is charting a journey of 2,000 kilometers, every one of them shadowed by risk.
And no matter how dangerous this mission is, it is nowhere near as dangerous as the silence of the entire world in the face of a live-stream genocide.
On board are activists including Greta Thunberg and Yasemin Ajar.
Suicide mission.
As they sail past the coast of Crete, we connect with them. They know they may be intercepted, diverted or detained at any moment. But still, they go. From the Mediterranean Sea, Greta Thunberg and Yasemin Ajar talk to Al Jazeera. Greta Thunberg, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera. I think anyone watching the carnage in Gaza can probably understand your motivation for wanting to help a people that UN officials say Israel is exposing to forced starvation. But why did you feel it was vital for you not only to support the Madeleine, but to be on board it?
It's just if you have any sense of humanity left, then there is no option but to stand with Palestine and to do everything you can. And for some reason, I have a platform that I can use. And if my presence on this boat can contribute in any way to showing solidarity with Palestinians, then I will do that.
Are you hopeful that the presence of prominent figures like yourself, like the Irish actor Liam Cunningham, this time on this boat, might help increase the Madeleine's chances of actually reaching Gaza?
That we don't know. But what we do know is that I and the others on board will continue doing everything we can, both in the short term and in the long term, to fight for justice and to demand an end to Israel's war crimes.
Given what happened to previous boats, do you in your heart feel you really will make it to Gaza? What are the chances, do you feel?
The uncertainties are very big, of course, and we have made many risk assessments trying to judge the situation, and we are preparing for different scenarios to respond in a non-violent way to maximize our safety. But we are aiming to sail to Gaza. That is what we do know at this point.
What will it mean for the world if this boat is either attacked by drones, as the Conscience was, or raided by Israeli commandos, as the Mavi Marmara was?
Yeah, we have made it very clear from the beginning that we are 12 peaceful volunteers who are not carrying weapons. We are carrying humanitarian aid. We will not be responding in any violent way. We are sailing on international waters, which is our right to do. So again, if someone, IOF or allies with Israel, decides to attack us, then it is just another example of the disrespect of international law and human rights.
Will you still consider this mission a success, even if you don't make it to Gaza?
The point, at least behind my participation here personally, is that I feel like no matter what odds we are facing, we have to keep trying. And whatever happens, we will be able to see that we tried our best. We tried every method we had at hands. And we will continue to do so in whatever shape or form, whether we make it to Gaza and will be able to distribute the humanitarian aid, or if we are stopped on the way. But we must also remember that we do not only need humanitarian aid to come into Gaza. We do not only need a ceasefire, we need an end to the occupation.
I'm not sure how closely you're able to follow social media these days, but
Not at all.
US Senator, not surprising, but US Senator Lindsey Graham posted on X a comment which has been widely seen as a threat against you and the aid mission, saying, "Hope Greta and her friends can swim." Does it shock you that this sort of devaluation of your life and the lives of the people with you on that boat can come from a senior figure of the US government, of the Congress?
Unfortunately, it does not surprise me. The reason why we have ended up in the situation we are is because of the systematic dehumanization of Palestinians and demonization of everyone who expressed solidarity. So that does not surprise me at all, unfortunately. It does say a lot about their approaches, that they, well, these elected officials who are complicit in genocide spend their time mocking people who are at least trying to do something rather than ending their complicity. Says everything you need to know about them.
What do you say back to him, Greta?
I don't need. For me, it's not worth my time responding to that. There are so many similar comments every day, and it's just why should I care?
How confident are you as an EU citizen that should this boat come under attack, that the EU, that EU navies will be there to assist you, given what happened to the previous ship, the Conscience?
Yeah. Unfortunately, not too confident.
What does bringing aid to Gaza mean for addressing the needs of people there whom dozens of UN special rapporteurs and experts, international human rights groups say are facing a genocide?
Yeah, of course, it is very, very clear that humanitarian aid desperately needs to come into Gaza, and that the blockade has to end. But as I said earlier, we do not only need short-term humanitarian aid, we need a long-term end to the occupation, a permanent ceasefire, and justice and freedom for all Palestinians. So the humanitarian aid is, of course, a symbolic amount, as we cannot fit too much on this boat. But it is also an attempt to once again try to break the siege and open up a humanitarian corridor. And of course, a symbolic act of solidarity with Palestinians.
We know the last boat, the Conscious, came under a drone attack. The Mavi Marmara was raided by Israeli commandos, a raid that killed 10 people. Is any part of you afraid, Greta?
What I'm afraid of is the deadly silence of the world and the passivity that so many people are showing right now when they know very much what is going on, that they do not put pressure on their own governments, even though that they know that they are very much complicit. That is what scares me the most.
You're very well known for your efforts to urge the world to protect the environment. Are you on the Madeleine today as a climate activist or simply as a human being who cares about the lives of others?
I would say the latter. Stepping up and showing solidarity with Palestine is something that everyone must do, no matter your background, no matter where you are from. And again, I'm a climate justice activist because I care about justice, because I care about human and planetary well-being. It should be self-evident why we should all act in all our power to stand in solidarity with Palestine. The question should not be, why do you care about Palestine? The question should be, why on earth are you not caring? Why are you not outraged?
So clearly you see a link between environmental activism and the mission that you're on, given that environmental and climate change often harms vulnerable communities. And what we see in Gaza is a very vulnerable community being harmed.
Yeah, of course. There are many direct links that show how ecocide and environmental destruction is a systematic method of war and used to oppress people. But also, again, it should be much simpler than that. It should just be, if you care about humans, if you care about justice, then you should care both about climate justice and justice for Palestine.
And a final question, Greta. We know that the Madeleine has been facing a lot of hurdles and challenges. We know it's been tracked by drones. What do you feel, how do you feel about the position that European governments have taken, Western governments, the US has taken towards this aid mission? Have they done their moral and legal responsibility in your eyes?
Nowhere near enough, but also we must remember that this mission is not about us. This mission is not about Madeleine and the passengers on board, the crew, the volunteers on board. This mission is about Palestine and the genocide and the occupation that is ongoing. And in that question, it is shameful every day how the world keeps showing its betrayal towards Palestinians.
If you do make it to Gaza, what do you plan to do? Have you thought about that scenario, as unlikely as it may seem to many people?
Yeah, then we will distribute humanitarian aid. That is the main goal.
Okay, thank you very much, Greta Thunberg, for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Yasamin Ajar, the steering committee member of the Freedom Flotilla, thank you so much for joining us on board the Madeleine in these very difficult circumstances. First of all, let me ask you how spirits are doing there, especially after I think the Madeleine was tracked by drones in the last few hours or so.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. We are on the Madeleine right now. It's our day 4, and the spirits are high. We are in good mood. We are doing exactly not the exact same things, but we live as we would live at home, and we continue our mission. We are on our way to Gaza.
Are you a little bit worried about the possibility of this boat coming under attack as the previous boat, the Conscience, did?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, we had drones above us yesterday, one at 11 p.m. and then again at 11 p.m. and then one at 3 a.m. and they were tracking us until approximately 5 a.m. And it's obvious that this is a scare tactic, definitely psychological warfare. We know exactly what could happen on this mission, looking at the history of the Freedom Flotilla and remembering what happened in 2010, and also remembering what happened 4 weeks ago, which is not so long ago. We were attacked by a drone in international waters, 20 miles off the coast from Malta. We are aware of the risks, but again, that is not what's going to stop us.
Yasamin, do you know who is sending these drones to track you? I think no one has claimed responsibility for the drone attack on the Conscience, right? So do you know who's sending these drones now to follow the Madeleine?
Well, we do know from 4 weeks ago that it was Israel sending these drones, even though they did not claim this attack or taken any responsibility, accountability, and there was no condemnation from the European Union, even though this attack happened in their very backyard. Last night, you can track these things. You can track drones, planes, and we know it was it was Greek. It came from Greece, and there was one drone, however, that we could not identify, and another drone, from what we know, was from the US. We did get in contact with the Coast Guard in Greece. When we asked these questions and asked them to identify these drones, they simply ignored us and said that we have to contact Malta because we are in the search and rescue territory of Malta.
That's, I imagine, quite... it raises a lot of questions, right? If you're being tracked, you say, by some Greek drones, some American drones, and some other drones you can't identify, have you asked the Greek and American authorities why they're tracking you? Are they there, or are they saying they're there to try and help protect you? Or do you fear that they may be cooperating with the Israelis for some other action?
Looking at the past 19 months, we have seen the war crimes committed by Israel. We all know that these war crimes or this genocide could not happen the way it's happening without its allies. And the mentioned states, they are very much complicit. So in Malta, the attack in Malta knew that Israel was sending a Hercules C-130 into Maltese airspace. So this is to say Malta is complicit in this attack. About the drones yesterday, we don't have answers from these governments, obviously. So this is what we are left with. I mean, You know,
Right.
with a world that does not take accountability, that does not give us any information. And this is due to the fact that they are all Israel's allies.
And your boat is unarmed, right? And you're all there as peaceful aid activists that want to bring aid into Gaza. How do you plan to deal with a scenario if you do come under attack?
Yes, we are a purely non-violent action, and this has been the legacy of the Freedom Flotilla. You know, of course, these are very legitimate questions that we are being asked, but we have to ask the question back to Israel and its allies: why would you even plan to attack a civilian vessel carrying nothing but humanitarian aid, carrying nothing but human rights activists? If we do come under attack, we have our, as I mentioned before, we have our nonviolent trainings. We do know how to abandon ship. But if there would be let's say, missiles fired at us or torpedoes, the chance of survival is very, very low. And we are very much aware of this.
All right, take us through what sort of cargo you're bringing to Gaza.
Our aid is literally a drop in the ocean. We packed the vessel with a lot of aid, as much as possible we can carry with us. But again, it's a drop in the ocean. However, this is a message to the world. We're saying we're not going to be silent. We're not going to accept the complicity. And we're definitely saying not in our name. We won't just sit here, watch a live stream genocide and a 3-month total blockade where not one bottle of water or one piece of bread or any medicine has entered Gaza. So Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. What we are carrying at the moment, we have medicine, we have rice, we have flour, we have baby formula. We even have crutches. Crutches for many, many years were not allowed into Gaza. We even have a prosthetic arm for a child.
You mentioned that it's a drop in the ocean. We know that there's around 2 million people in Gaza facing very difficult conditions. International human rights groups like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch talk about a genocide and acts of genocide that they're facing. So is the main goal of your mission really simply to break this siege and to establish the precedent and the principle that people can respond and help?
Absolutely. Our aim is to open up a people's humanitarian sea corridor. And this action is, we are literally saying that we have to come together. We have to come together and be in solidarity. How can we be in solidarity? We can be in solidarity with our actions. And this is the Madleen. We are taking action. We are taking the actions that our governments are supposed to take. But our governments are shipping weapons instead of the aid. They are upholding the illegal siege and the illegal blockade on Gaza. And so this is basically why we are here. This is basically why we are doing what we are doing.
Am I right in assuming that regardless of whether the Madleen makes it to Gaza or not, this won't be the last attempt?
Absolutely not. The Madleen is our 36th ship since 2008, and we will continue. They tried to stop us in Malta. Last year, they stopped us in Istanbul. We were carrying 5,500 tons of aid. But due to bureaucratic warfare, we could not go to Gaza. We could not sail to Gaza. And then we attempted again with our small vessel Handala. And again, we were stopped. And this year, now we have managed to set sail with our beautiful sailing boat, Madleen.
I need to ask you, Yasemin, in your heart of hearts, do you really believe you will make it to Gaza?
You know, I believe that if we didn't have hope, we wouldn't be able to do all of this work, because it requires a lot of work to make this mission happen. And of course, we are fighting governments, we are fighting bureaucratic warfare, and even drone attacks now.
But which governments do you feel are fighting a bureaucratic war against you?
You know, we had the flag of Palau on the conscience, and Palau deflagged us 7 hours prior to the attack. So this was a well-planned attack. And this has happened last year in Istanbul as well. We were deflagged. And, you know, the port authorities are the ones that are also trying to stop us.
What do you say to friends, to relatives who might be worried about your safety? How do you explain to them your decision, your conviction that you must be on the Madeleine?
Of course, people that love me, people that know me, worry about me, but our lives are not more worth than the lives of the Palestinians. And if we do realize this, and if we can give up on our privileges and purely stand up for justice and what's right, I think we can overcome these fears if we do have them. I personally don't fear Israel, neither do I fear the consequences of our action. I have hope, and I believe in justice, and justice has to be fought for, and we have to make a stand. If we look away, what will that say about us, and what world are we preparing for the generations to come?
Yes, Amin, a moment ago you mentioned some of the deflagging and procedural hurdles that you've been confronted with. And just to clarify, that all applies to previous flotillas or previous boats, not to the Madeleine that you're on. Also on the previous missions by the Conscience, for example, the last boat, it was bombed by a drone. And we know that the Freedom Flotilla Coalition put out a statement saying that Maltese authorities had prevented other ships from reaching the Conscience, even though it was in international waters. Have you asked the Maltese authorities, I'm curious to know, for an explanation as to why they stopped other ships coming to the aid of the Conscience after it was hit by a drone in international waters?
Yes, of course. We were in contact with the Maltese authorities. However, we were not in direct contact. They would. It was very difficult, and it's very important to mention that the crew members were stranded for almost 2 weeks in international waters, meaning that Malta put them under danger because attacks could have happened anytime after the first attack. So these people were treated like they are the terrorists.
Yes, I mean, let me put to you the line that I read from the Maltese authorities. They were saying that they had actually offered the Conscience assistance, but the crew of the Conscience was initially refusing that assistance from the Maltese Navy. Is that your understanding of what happened?
So let's go back to the attack. The attack happened during midnight. It was 12:11, something like that. There were 2 bombs released onto the Conscience, which caused a fire and injured 4 people on the Conscience. And the Navy came and wanted them to abandon the ship. Mind you, we are a humanitarian mission. We have the goal to break the siege, and the people on the vessel, the crew members and the activists, refused to abandon the ship because in the history of the flotilla, our ships get confiscated. So this is the reason why they refused to abandon the ship. And also they did not identify themselves to be the Navy or where they are from, even though they were asked by the crew to identify themselves. They did not identify themselves. And after a horrific attack like that, I think no one would abandon the ship and get on another vessel if the people on the other vessel did not identify themselves, because it could be pretty much Israel or someone that would want to harm them.
Clearly, there's a lot going against you and against this mission by the Madeleine. You've mentioned some of the challenges that the Freedom Flotilla Coalition faced on the Conscience. We've seen in 2010 the Israeli raid on the Mavi Marmara that killed 10 people. The ICC decided ultimately not to investigate that further. There's been no sign of accountability for the drone attack on the Conscience last month. When you've got all of that in the back of your mind, do you feel the world powers really care about you, about your colleagues there on the boat, and about this mission of trying to help people in Gaza?
Our governments do not care about humanity. we're talking about colonialism, imperialism, capitalism. What do these three have in common? It's power, it's money. And if they would have cared about human beings, they would have cared first and foremost about the almost 20,000 children murdered in Gaza, only identified. I'm talking about the identified. There's so many more unidentified children murdered under the rubble and blown into pieces. So knowing this, we believe that we don't count on our governments, to be honest. We count on the civil society. And if you go on social media, if you go right now into the news, people know, the world knows that we are on our way because we took a stand. And so many people around the world are in solidarity because they feel we also represent them. And this is what we have to pay attention to, because people can make a nation or they can break a nation. And we are 12 people, but we are millions of people on this vessel. Every day, the messages that we receive, even talking to journalists, our voices are heard, and our voices don't represent us. Our voices represent the voiceless, which are the Palestinians in Gaza being starved to death, being bombed to pieces.
Yasamina Jar, it's been a pleasure to talk to you aboard the Madeleine. Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to hearing more about your journey as it progresses. Yasamina Jar,
thank you so much.
Steering Committee member and organizer of the Freedom Flotilla of the Madeleine.
And a pale afternoon, and I walked by your Lord, and
Thank you. Thank you for joining me. Have a great evening. Thank you for doing that. Sam Melvin, why do you just say no? Thank you. Have a good day. Have a great evening. Of just say no. Thank you.